Hello, guys. Hello, hello. I hope everyone's doing well today. We are here to do story time on a Saturday. Actually, on the Saturday. And this is Abraham. Bless his heart. He never gets to come out of the room, do you, honey? No. This is Abraham. He's wearing his Baby Yoda onesie. You're hot today. Yes, it's hot. So, we're going to get started with story time. Peter Pan. Just a moment. Okay, we are going to read chapter 11 of Peter Pan. It's called Hook or Me this time. There's Abraham. Peter had sneaked through the jungle, unseen, midway to Kidd's Creek. He passed the crocodile that as always was on Hook's trail. It was not ticking because the clock had ran down. Peter grinned as a clever idea occurred to him. He imitated the ticking sound. It was perfect. Even the crocodile thought it was real and began to follow Peter. Peter swam easily across the open water to the ship. He scampered up its side and still ticking, thought it will be Hook or me this time, he thought, as he hoisted himself over the rail. The boys stood silently and by so they would not give him away. Bye. At that moment, the quartermaster came along the deck. Peter pushed him over the rail. "One down," slightly whispered, and began to keep count. Captain Hook peered from his hiding place behind the ring of men. The ticking sound had stopped. He emerged as if he had not been scared out of his wits. His eyes glowed red, his scowl turned sinister once more. Get the boys to Get these boys to Johnny Plank, he ordered. He leaped onto the plank and began to dance along its precarious length. A devilish grin crossed his face as he sang. Yo ho ho, the frisky plank. You walks along it so, till it goes down and you goes down to Davy Jones below. Hook jumped to the deck, but first a bit of the whip for his prisoners, he said. No, the boy shouted. Jukes, a pirate, hurried to the cabin to fetch the dreaded cat of Nine Tails. Oh my goodness. I did not show y'all that picture. I am so sorry. There you go. It's a picture. Not much, but it's a picture. Sorry, Abraham. Peter is in the cabin, slightly whispered to the cowering boys. A dreadful screech burst from the dark cabin. What was that? Hook cried. Two down, Slightly said, with a grin. Another pirate dashed into the cabin, but burst out a second later. Jukes is gone, he gasped. There's something terrible in there. Hook eyed his men. Get in there, and see what it is, he hissed as Seiko entered the cabin cautiously. Another horrible screech split the air. Three, Slightly said. The pirate captain turned to Starkey. I believe I heard you volunteer, he said. No, Starkey said. Definitely, I won't go in there. So it's mutiny, is it? Hook growled. Starkey glanced at the ring of pirates gathered around Captain Hook. None of them moved. Starkey eyed the dark cabin, and then the captain's gleaming iron hook. Neither choice looked good. He spun on his heels and leaped for the rail into the sea. Four, Slightly whispered to the other boys. Hook polished his claw against his coat. If one of you won't go, I'll fetch that cap myself, he said. He grabbed a flickering lantern and walked to the cabin door. Slightly pursed his lips, ready to count 5. But Hook staggered out before any damage was done. Something blew out the light, he muttered. Someone's aboard who doesn't belong, the pirate said. Maybe it's the devil. The ship is doomed, another cried. Oh my goodness. Hook touched his nose with the tip of his hook. Send the prisoners in, he said. If they beat what's in there, or it beats them, will be none the worse. The pirate showed the boys into the cabin and slammed the door behind them. They turned away so they would not have to witness what was sure to follow. Again, inside the cabin, Peter unlocked the chains, binding the boys. They all found weapons and, on Peter's hushed command, sneaked out the door unseen. Peter ran to... You know what, guys? Oh my goodness, I'm not showing y'all the picture. I'm so sorry. Anyway, let's keep going. He touched his nose with the tip of his hook. Send the prisoners in, he said. If they beat what's in there, it beats them, and will be none the worse. The pirates showed the boys into the cabin and slammed the door behind them. They turned away so they would not have to witness what was sure to follow. Inside the cabin, Peter unlocked the chains, binding the boys. They all found weapons, and on Peter's hushed command, sneaked out the door unseen. Peter ran to Wendy and cut her bonds with his dagger. Now nothing prevented Peter and the children from flying to safety, but Peter's bow rang in his ears. Hook or me this time, he had said. They would fight to the finish. Peter wrapped Wendy's cloak around himself and put his back to the mast as Wendy hid in the darkness with the boys. Peter uttered a loud scream. The pirates were certain the noise signaled the end of the boys. They were panic-stricken. Whatever was in the cabin would surely come for them now. Hook sensed mutiny. He quickly turned to the mast. It's the girl, he snarled. A woman on a pirate ship brings bad luck. When she's gone, we'll get rid of what's in that cabin. He raised his clawed arm. Throw her overboard, he shouted. The pirates dashed for the cloaked figure at the mast, and it was time for Peter to strike. He threw the cloak to the deck and brandished his dagger. Okay, Peter Pan, Hook screamed. At once he and his men knew what it was that had lurked inside the cabin. His black heart thumped with fear, but the fight had gone out of him. Get him, he ordered, but his voice was weak. Attack, boys, Peter shouted to the children. They burst from their hiding place and went straight for the pirates. One by one, the pirates fell or were tossed overboard. Slightly could scarcely keep count. The din of battle echoed over the water until at last only one pirate remained. The band of boys surrounded him with their gleaming swords in the air. I wonder who that pirate is. Who's the pirate, Abraham? Yep. You're absolutely right, Abraham. Put away your swords, boys, Peter shouted. He jumped into the circle to face Captain Hook alone. This one is mine, he said. Hook glared at Peter. Prepare to meet thy doom, he hissed. The pirate captain leaped at Peter with his hook and sword slashing in the air. Peter quickly danced out of danger. He thrust with his own sword to nip Hook's coat. Hook nimbly escaped a more serious blow. He slashed back at Peter, and again Peter parried the captain's attack. Again and again the two exchanged strikes. Again and again they avoided the worst. A sudden thrust by Peter sent Hook's sword flying to the deck. Disarmed, Hook was doomed. But Peter bowed graciously and allowed his evil foe to recover the fallen weapon. Hook was enraged by Peter's good form. Who are you? Captain Hook shouted, still fighting for his life. I'm youth, and I'm joy, Peter exclaimed, still pursuing his filtering prey. The two fought on, but Hook was clearly finished. In desperation, the pirate gave up. The fight, he dashed into the powder warehouse and lit the fuse of a powerful cannonball. The ship will be blown to pieces in 2 minutes. Hook crowned. He desperately wanted to see Peter turn tail and flee for his life. Peter rushed into the warehouse. He grabbed the sputtering bomb and hurled it overboard as calmly as if it were a scrap of bread for a passing seagull. Once more, Peter's good form got the better of Hook. Outfought and outwitted, Hook was beaten in every way. He staggered to the rail and climbed to its top. If he could not win, he could escape, even though it meant showing the worst form of all, which, with its black locks and long-tailed coat flying in the wind, Hook prepared to leap into the sea. He stared down at the dark water. A pair of eyes stared back. The crocodile snapped his powerful jaws. Hook shuddered. He turned his back to Peter. Peter stepped forward with a swift kick, sent Hook toppling into the sea. Bad form, Hook jeered as he vanished forever. The pirates were beaten. Peter and the boys raised a victory cheer as Wendy stepped out from the shadows. "It's very late," she said, "and time for bed." Without protest, the exhausted children lay down and soon were fast asleep. Okay, that was the end of chapter 11. But you know what, guys? We've only got one chapter left. So let's finish this book today. Just a moment. Okay, we're going to read chapter 12. There's Abraham. And I just found out last night, this is my son's book, and he wants it back. So we're going to go ahead and finish this. The last chapter of Peter Pan is called The Return Home. Let's see what kind of adventure they get into now, huh, Abraham? Alright, here we go. The pirate ship plowed through the sea with its crew of children and its captain, Peter Pan, at the helm. With luck, they would reach the Azores by the end of June. It would be easy to fly home from there. Wendy, John, and Michael had been gone for a very long time. They were eager to return and looked forward to the surprise on their mother's face. In the meantime, Mr. and Mrs. Darling waited. Mrs. Darling kept the nursery just as it was, although Nana's kennel was moved out between 9 and 6 o'clock. Mr. Darling felt it was his fault the children were gone, since it was he who had chained Okay. Nana in the yard, and that fateful night, he was so ashamed of his actions that he deferred to Nana and followed her wishes completely. To show his remorse, he stayed in the kennel and refused to come out. The first ones to reach the house at number 14 was Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. They flew to the open window. "Quick, Tink," Peter said, "close the window and bar it. When Wendy returns, she'll think her mother does not want her back. Then she'll come back to Neverland with me." Peter Pan had planned this trick all along. He did not want Wendy to return home at all. He flew to another window and glanced in. "Mrs. Darling, it's Mrs. Darling!" he exclaimed. The children's mother had fallen asleep at the piano. "She's pretty, but not as pretty as my mother," Peter said. Of course, Peter didn't know his own mother, even though he liked to say that he did. You will never see Wendy again," he whispered. Two fresh tears sparkled on Mrs. Darling's cheeks. Peter stared at them. "She is awfully fond of Wendy," he said. "She wants the window open so the children can come back. But then Wendy won't be able to stay with me. We can't both have her." He could not take his eyes off Mrs. Darling's sad face. "Oh, all right," he gulped. He quickly opened the nursery window. "Come on, Tink. We don't want any silly mothers." He turned his back to the window and flew away. Soon Wendy, John, and Michael reached the house. The window was open for them. After all, they flew inside and landed gently on the floor. Each looked around as if they had forgotten it was their home. "I think I've been here before," Michael said. Whoops. "Of course you have, silly," John replied. "There's your bed, and there's the kennel. Maybe Nana is inside now," Michael exclaimed. Just then a noise from the hall warned the children that someone was coming. "It's Mother!" Wendy exclaimed. "Then you're not really our mother?" Michael asked in a sleepy voice. Wendy shook her head. She pointed to the beds. "Quickly," she said. "Get into bed, as if we've never been away." The children jumped into the beds and pulled up the covers. When Mrs. Darling peeked into the room, she saw at once that all the beds were full. She was sure she was dreaming. She sat down in her chair, just as she had done when they were babies. "Mother!" Wendy cried. "That's Wendy," Mrs. Darling said. "Mother!" John shouted. "That's John," Mrs. Darling said. "Mother!" Michael frowned. "Then that's Michael," Mrs. Darling said, certain at last it was not a dream. She stretched out her arms for her children, who leaped out of bed and ran to her. "George! George!" Mrs. Darling called to her husband. She wrapped her arms tightly around the children and held them very tight, very close. There never was a lovelier sight. Mr. Darling woke and came running, with Nana close on his heels. Outside the window was a small face, stared into the cozy room. It was the little boy whose life was filled with adventure and joy. But now, looking in through the window, Peter Pan saw the one joy he would never ever know. The Lost Boys were waiting outside. Wendy quickly explained to her mother that they would like to come in. Too soon, slightly. Toodle, Girly, Nibs, and the twins were in the children's room. They were still dressed in their pirate clothes. Let's see. Each boy looked into Mrs. Darling's eyes as if to say, "May we stay? May we please stay?" Mrs. Darling agreed immediately to let the boys stay, but Mr. Darling was not so sure. After all, there were 6 of them, and the Darlings already had 3 children. If we would be too much of a handful, We will go away, the first twin said. We will share a bed, Nib said. I will cut their hair, Wendy said. We'll spit in, Sir, Toodles said. Mr. Darling nodded. Yes, he said. You can stay. Hoopla, the boys shouted, and they all danced together. All danced through the house and with joy and finally had a real home. As for Peter, we saw Wendy one last time before returning to Neverland. He flew past the window and Wendy opened it to let him in. Goodbye, Wendy, he said. Are you really going? Wendy asked. Mrs. Darling entered the room. She smiled at Peter and asked him to stay. Would you send me to school? Peter asked. Of course, Miss Darling replied. And I would have to grow up? Peter asked. Of course, Miss Darling replied. I don't want to grow up, Peter said. Oh my goodness. I'm going back to Neverland to live with Tink in a house in the trees. He glanced at Wendy. It will be such fun, he said, hoping she would go with him. May I go with Peter, Mother? Wendy asked. Of course not, Miss Darling said. But he needs a mother, Wendy said. And so do you, answered Mrs. Darling. You may visit Peter once each spring to help with this spring cleaning. Wendy agreed, though she would have preferred to go right with them. She turned to Peter. You won't forget me, will you, Peter? She asked. Of course not, Peter promised, and then he flew away. She lost the boys. Soon, the lost boys were in schools. Some did well, while others had to struggle. After a time, they all forgot how to fly, even Michael. They were no longer believed they could. Peter came for Wendy the next year, but she was surprised to learn he had already forgotten many of their adventures together. He didn't even remember Captain Hook or Tinker Bell because his head was filled with new adventures. The next year, Wendy waited for Peter in vain. He did not come. Many more years passed, and Wendy was quite grown up. She didn't mind at all that she was grown. In fact, she liked it. Peter became a distant memory. The boys grew up too, and each went on his own way in life, just as they should. Wendy married and had a daughter of her own named Jane, who was just as inquisitive as her mother. Jan loved to hear her mother tell of the boy who visited the nursery. Jan lived in the same nursery Wendy did when she was little. Oh, how cute. One night, after Wendy finished telling a story, Peter Pan himself flew in the window. He had no idea so many years had passed, for he was still a boy. Wendy felt strange because we're all grown up, and Peter had not changed one bit. Hello, Wendy, Peter said. Hello, Peter, Wendy replied. Peter glanced around the room. Where's John? He asked. And where is Michael? They aren't here anymore, Wendy said. Have you forgotten that this is spring cleaning time? Peter asked. I can't go with you, Peter, Wendy said. I've forgotten how to fly, and I'm all grown up now. I'll soon teach you again, Peter said. Please, Peter, don't waste the fairy dust on me, Wendy replied. Peter was afraid for the first time in life. No, he said. But it was too late. The moment Wendy turned up the light, he saw she was a woman and not a little girl. Peter sat on the floor and began to cry. His sobs woke Jan. Why are you crying, boy? Jan asked. They were the very words Wendy first said to Peter many years before. Peter stood quickly and bowed very low. My name is Peter Pan, he said. Yes, I know, Jan said. I've been waiting for you. When Wendy returned, she discovered Peter sitting on the bed post and Jan flying around the room. She is my mother, Peter said to Wendy. Wendy shook her head sadly. Yes, she said. Nobody knows that as well as I. Peter flew into the air. Goodbye. Wendy said. Jan flew to join him, and the two darted to the window. No, Wendy shouted as she ran to the window. It's just for spring cleaning time, Jan said to her mother. Wendy knew she could not hold them back. Peter flew out the window and Jan trailing joyfully behind. If only I could go with you, Wendy said. Wendy sighed. When Jan grew up, she also had a daughter. When spring cleaning time came, she flew off with Peter Pan to be his mother, and so it will be forever as long as oh my goodness. Let me try again, guys. I'm sorry. And so it will be forever as long as there are children. The end. And that was the end of Peter Pan. I hope y'all enjoyed Peter Pan. Now I can take that back to my son. So I'm going to pause you. We're going to do one more book. Just a moment. Okay, here we go. This is called How Rocket Learned to Read. I hope I haven't read this already. Rocket had loved to play. He loved to chase leaves and chew sticks. He loved to listen to birds sing. Every fall morning after chasing leaves, Rocket would be down in his favorite spot under the favorite tree. Then he'd sniff the neighborhood smells and settle in for a good nap. But one day, a little yellow bird startled Rocket. Aha, my first student. Wonderful, she sang. Rocket was confused. Student, I'm not a... But I am your teacher. The bird interrupted. Then you must be my student. Rocket found it hard to argue with this bird. Poor little guy. I'm so glad you saw my sign, the bird chirped. Oh yes, I can see it, Rocket said, but I don't know how to read. Can't read? Fantastic, she waved a wing. Welcome to my classroom, but I just came here to take a nap, Rocket said. Oh, no. There will be no napping in class, declared the bird, except, of course, during nap time. Well then, I can take a nap over here, said Rocket. I've had a very busy morning. Not to worry, I'll be around every day, chirped the bird, until the weather changes. Until the weather turns. Class starts today. As Rocket breathed in the crisp air, the little yellow bird hung her banner. Ah, the wondrous, mighty, gorgeous alphabet, she marveled. It was where it all begins. Open up a book, the bird began to read. She sang out the story of an unlucky dog named Buster, who'd last lost his favorite bone. A cool breeze carried her lively voice across the yard. At first, Rocket was disturbed. But before long, he found himself captivated. To Rocket, the story was as delicious as the earthly smells of fall. It was exciting, and as chasing leaves, he closed his eyes and listened to every word. And Buster Dog and dug under the lilac bush, the bird read, he felt something familiar. Rocket waited. Was it was it the bone? He wondered. Silence. Was it the bone? He called to the bird. More silence. Was it the bone? Rocket bellowed. Suddenly, he was rushing to the tree. Well, was it? But the little bird was gone. The next morning, Rocket arrived early. At last, the little yellow bird appeared. Hello. How wonderful to see you in class, She chirped. I can tell by your waggy tail that you are well rested. I'd like to hear the end of the story, please, said Rocket. That seems like a fine way to start the day, chirped the bird. She gave Rocket a name tag and began to read. Every day, Rocket returned to the little yellow bird's classroom. In the morning, the bird taught him a new letter. Until he had learned all of the wondrous, mighty, gorgeous alphabet. Together they sang the sounds that each letter makes and spelled the sounds they heard around them. With a G and many R's, they replied. They spelled Mr. Barker's growl. Grrr. Whoosh! They spelled the sound of the wind which was growling colder by the day. Soon they were spelling the words like F-A-L-L for, hang on guys, for the gusty time of year, and R-E-D for the color of the leaves. Each afternoon the bird read a story. She read stories about dogs and birds. She read about leaves changing colors and about birds flying south for the winter. Then one day the weather turned and the letter, oh my goodness. The one day the weather turned and the little banner disappeared. See you again in the glorious spring, the bird sang. As she flew to the wintry skies, she called, don't forget, words are built one letter at a time. The days grew shorter and the leaves fell from trees. The grass became crunchy. Soon Rocket's classroom disappeared under the snow. He remembered the little yellow bird's alphabet and practiced his letters. Y'all see he wrote letters in the snow. Y'all see that or not? Rocket thought about the bird's sweet chirp while he sounded out words like D-I-G and W-I-N-D and C-O-L-D. He made new friends and replied and spelled their name. Hello, I'm Emma. E-M-M-A. Hi there, I'm Fred. F-R-E-D. He spelled everything. Sun, S-U-N. Melt, M-E-L-T. When Rocket spelled M-U-D, he knew the spring, as it always does, had returned. That's mud. The breeze blew warmer, the grass grew greener, and a sign appeared. Early the next morning, Rocket rushed to his classroom. As he waited, he spelled W-A-G. Welcome back, Rocket, the sign said. Soon the little yellow bird arrived. Aha! My star student, she sang. How wonderful to see you. I can tell by your waggy tail that you are ready for class. Okay, we're back, sorry. Then together they began to read. They read stories about birds flying north in the spring. They read about picnics in the warm sun. They read about Buster, the lucky dog who found his bone under the lilac bush. Let's see. And when they were done, they write it again and again, and AGAIN. Again. And that was the end of Rocket Learns to Read. Thank y'all for joining me and Abraham today for story time. Sorry. For story time. We enjoyed it, and I just wanted to let you know that we got a big surprise coming, so y'all might want to keep a watch out, and I will share him with you when he arrives, or when it arrives, shall I say, when it arrives. So y'all have a wonderful and blessed weekend. Stay safe, be blessed, and have a great weekend, not just a good weekend. Much love, everyone. Bye-bye.